Have you ever wondered why bad things happen to good people? Why does suffering often befall the righteous while the wicked seem to prosper? This isn't a new question. Its profound answer lies within an ancient, transformative story. In the fertile lands of Uz, there lived a man named Kaelen, whose story would become the greatest test of faith ever told. Kaelen was neither king nor prophet, but a man of profound righteousness and immense abundance. His reverence for the divine was so great that he never strayed towards evil, living as the most upright and honest person his world had known. His wealth stretched across vast herds of cattle, flourishing fields, and an army of loyal servants, making him the most prosperous man in the East. Yet, Kaelen's greatest treasure was not his wealth, but his family. 10 children, 7 sons, and 3 beautiful daughters filled his grand home with joy. Alongside his beloved wife, Lyra, they lived in harmony, celebrating feasts and enjoying all the blessings the divine had bestowed upon them. Their laughter echoed through the halls, a testament to Kaelen's true abundance, a life brimming with warmth and familial unity. Despite all his blessings, Kaelen did not sleep peacefully. Each morning, before the first light of dawn, he would already be on his feet, deep in prayer. With steady hands, he offered burnt offerings for each of his children, tormented by a quiet, worrisome thought. Perhaps one of my children has sinned. Maybe in their heart they have cursed the divine. Kaelen understood how fragile blessings could be, and so, without fail, he interceded for them, not out of fear, but out of profound love. But at that very moment, someone was watching him from the heavens. The heavens opened into an eternal court, not a place of stone and mortar, but of pure light and resonant power, where time held no sway. Here, the celestial beings, the sons of the divine, presented themselves before the throne, entities of boundless light and ancient wisdom who gazed upon the vastness of creation. Among them, a distinct shadow moved with unwavering steps, the Adversary. He was the wanderer, the accuser, the one who never rested, his presence a stark, unsettling contrast to the radiant glory of the assembly. A sense of unease rippled through the luminous host, for his coming always heralded a reckoning. The divine gazed upon the Adversary, and a voice thundered with indescribable power echoing through the celestial expanse. "Where you come from?" the Adversary replied, a sly bow accompanying his words, "From roaming the earth, from wandering through it." And it was true. His eyes had witnessed everything. He had seen empires rise and crumble, hearts waver under temptation, men sell their souls for fleeting power, and the righteous stumble. He was the eternal observer of humanity's failings, ever ready to chronicle every misstep. The divine listened, fully aware of the cynical depths of the Adversary's gaze, knowing precisely what had occupied his restless mind. Yet, among all the frailty the Adversary had observed, there was one whose integrity shone like a beacon. The divine spoke of him with conviction, his voice resonating with pride. "Have you not seen my servant Kaelen? There is no one like him on earth, blameless, upright, divine-fearing, and shunning evil." The Adversary retorted, a sneer twisting his shadowy features. "Does Kaelen fear the divine for nothing? You have protected him and blessed him in every way. You have built an invisible hedge around him, safeguarding his home, his family, and his wealth. Everything he touches prospers. And you're surprised he remains faithful. But take away everything he possesses. Destroy his wealth. Snatch away his children. Make him taste the dust of ruin. And you will see how he curses you to your face." The challenge was set, a cosmic wager on the very nature of faith. The divine responded firmly, his gaze unwavering. "Everything he has is in your hands. Only do not harm him." An invisible whisper spread through the heavenly assembly. The Adversary had been granted permission. Without delay, the Adversary turned and vanished, his shadowy form descending from the ethereal court. Kaelen's fate was sealed. His faith, once a quiet devotion, was now destined to endure the most brutal test any man had ever faced. The next day, a deceptive calm settled over Kaelen's sprawling estate. His children were gathered within the grand house, their laughter echoing as they celebrated, sharing bread and wine. In the sun-drenched fields, oxen dutifully plowed the rich soil, donkeys grazed peacefully on lush pastures, and a multitude of servants tended to the flourishing herds. Everything appeared in perfect order, a tableau of abundance and harmony, utterly unaware of the cosmic wager that had been placed upon their lives. But suddenly, the serene facade shattered. Without warning, a servant burst into Kaelen's house, his face a mask of breathless terror. With a voice trembling with fear and exhaustion, he announced, "Master, the Sabians attacked. They swept through your fields, took your oxen and donkeys, and slaughtered the servants with their swords. I alone escaped to bring you this news." A cold, piercing chill ran down Kaelen's spine, a premonition of deeper darkness. Before he could even respond, before the shock could fully register, another horror was already unfolding. Another man, scorched and panting, stumbled through the doorway. "Master! Fire fell from the sky! A storm of flames consumed your sheep and your shepherds! Nothing remains. Only I escaped to tell you." Kaelen could barely breathe. Fire from the heavens? Was this judgment? A terrifying sign from the divine? His mind reeled, struggling to comprehend the rapid, inexplicable destruction. But the universe offered no pause for reflection, only an escalating torrent of despair, as yet another messenger appeared, his face etched with unspeakable desperation. He nearly tripped, collapsing before Kaelen. "Sir, the Chaldeans attacked in 3 swift bands. Your camels have been stolen, your servants all slain by the sword. Only I escaped to tell you." Kaelen felt the very ground open beneath his feet. Everything he owned, his entire legacy, his vast prosperity, all reduced to ashes in mere moments. But as the weight of total material ruin pressed down upon him, a chilling whisper echoed in the depths of his soul, a terrifying premonition that somehow, impossibly, the worst was yet to come. Kaelen had felt the ground open beneath his feet with the theft of his camels, his entire legacy reduced to ashes in mere moments. But the narrator had promised the worst was yet to come. A fourth messenger stumbled into Kaelen's house. He did not speak. His face, etched with unspeakable horror, conveyed what his words could not. Kaelen's heart, already a bruised and weary thing, began to pound with terrifying force. An icy dread seized him. He knew, instinctively, that this news was about his children. The ultimate fear was about to be confirmed. With a voice barely a whisper, broken by the horror he had witnessed, the messenger finally spoke. "Sir, your children, they were in the eldest son's house, feasting, celebrating. A great wind, a sudden, furious blast came from the desert. It struck the house from all 4 corners, and it collapsed. They all perished. Only I escaped to bring you the news." Kaelen heard nothing else. The world seemed to stop its spinning, the vibrant colors of life fading to gray. The weight of sorrow pulled him into a darkness deeper than any death, an abyss where joy could not exist. In an instant, he had lost everything, every possession, his entire family. Yet, Kaelen did not cry out. He did not curse himself or the divine. Instead, he rose slowly, with trembling hands. He tore his robe, a heavy, rough sound in the desolate silence. With a solemn expression, he took a knife and passed the blade over his head, locks of his hair falling to the dust-covered ground. It was an ancient act of mourning, of surrender, an absolute acknowledgement that his life, his power, his fortune, his lineage, all had been reduced to ashes. Then, in an astonishing display of spirit, he fell to the ground, pressing his face into the dirt, and worshipped. His voice, broken by grief yet firm with conviction, echoed in the silence as he declared, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will return there." And then, a declaration that would defy the heavens. "The divine gave, and the divine has taken away. Blessed be the name of the divine." This was Kaelen's greatest victory. He had lost everything, but instead of rebelling, he surrendered to the loss. There was no complaint, no reproach, no demand for explanation. Kaelen didn't understand why all of this was happening, but he drew closer to the divine. He bowed down and worshipped, acknowledging that everything he possessed was a gift, not a right. Kaelen's faith sustained him through utter disaster, growing even stronger. This is the true meaning of unyielding faith, absolute trust in the divine, sustaining you even in the worst of times. His faith was not dependent on what the divine gave him, but on who the divine was. Kaelen had overcome the adversary's test, but the adversary was not satisfied with his defeat. Days passed, and the heavens opened once again, signaling that the cosmic drama was far from over. Days passed on earth, yet in the eternal court of the divine, time held a different rhythm. Once again, the heavens opened, and the celestial beings presented themselves before the throne of light and power. Among them, a familiar shadow walked with unwavering steps, the adversary. The divine gazed upon him, his voice thundering with indescribable authority. "Where have you come from?" The adversary flashed a sly smile, bowing slightly, as if keeping a dark secret. "From roaming the earth, from wandering through it." He had tested Kaelen and had failed to break his spirit. The divine, fully aware of his true intentions, observed him. Thus, the divine posed the question that would disarm him. "Have you considered my servant Kaelen? Despite all that you took from him, he still maintains his integrity. There is no one like him on earth. A perfect and upright man, one who fears the divine and shuns evil. You incited me to ruin him without reason, yet he remains steadfast." The divine's words struck the accuser like a hammer. Kaelen had triumphed in the first trial, a humiliation for the adversary. But the enemy was not about to give up. With eyes blazing with fury, he stepped forward and said, "Skin for skin." The divine looked at him with displeasure. "A man will give everything he has to save his own life." The adversary grinned slightly, having found the perceived weak spot. "Stretch out your hand, touch his flesh and bone, and you'll see how he curses you to your face." The celestial beings remained silent. The challenge had been issued, but the divine did not break his gaze. He knew Kaelen's heart. "He is in your hands," he declared, "but do not lay a finger on his life." Without wasting time, the adversary descended in fury. There were no more riches to destroy, no more children to take away. Now he would strike his body. Within hours, Kaelen was ravaged by a terrible disease. A shadowy form, a flash of dark energy, struck the man who had stood firm. It was a direct, personal assault, designed to break the very vessel of his unwavering faith. Without warning, Kaelen was ravaged by a terrible disease. His skin, once glowing with health and the divine's blessing, transformed into a grotesque landscape of open, festering sores, stretching from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. Pain enveloped him like a suffocating shroud of agony, a relentless torment that consumed every fiber of his being. Fever burned within him, stripping his flesh in shreds, and an unbearable itching clawed at his skin like fire. The once mighty man could no longer walk without his body screaming from the agony. He couldn't sleep without the nightmare of his suffering persisting. All he could do was sit in the dust and ashes, broken, forgotten, and utterly disfigured. Days blurred into an endless cycle of torment. The man who was once the greatest in the East, revered and prosperous, had become a shadow of his former self, a human wreck consumed by disease and despair. In a desperate, raw attempt to find even a sliver of relief, Kaelen took a jagged piece of broken pottery and began to scrape himself with it. The excruciating pain of the shards against his inflamed skin offered no true solace, only a different kind of agony, a stark symbol of his profound degradation. News of his suffering had spread, and with it all his honor had vanished. Everyone who had once known him had abandoned him, save one. News of Kaelen's suffering had spread, his former honor now a cruel memory. He was no longer the greatest man in the East, but a human wreck, consumed by a terrible affliction. Everyone who had once known him had abandoned him, save one. His wife, Lyra, remained. She had watched him lose everything, their wealth, their children, their future. Now she saw her beloved husband reduced to a living corpse, his body a landscape of agony, her heart already torn apart by unspeakable grief, had reached its absolute limit. With tears streaming down her face, her voice trembling with a despair deeper than any words could convey, she approached the man who was once her strength, her very soul laid bare. She knelt beside him, her gaze a mirror of his own torment, but without his profound resolve. "Do you still cling to your integrity?" she whispered, the words laced with a raw, agonizing desperation. "Curse the divine and die." It was the final, most insidious blow. The adversary, unable to break Kaelen's spirit through material loss or physical agony, now employed the voice of his closest bond, his beloved wife, to tempt him to blaspheme. This was the ultimate test, a challenge to the very core of his being, a climactic emotional conflict designed to shatter his unyielding faith. Kaelen closed his eyes, the pain of her words sharper than any festering sore. He knew she was broken too, her spirit fractured by their shared tragedy. Yet, Kaelen's faith, forged in the fires of unimaginable loss, did not waver an inch. He slowly opened his eyes, met her stunned gaze, and replied, his voice weary but resolute, "You speak like a foolish woman. Shall we accept only the good from the divine and not the bad?" Kaelen's test wasn't merely about losing everything. It was about seeing if his faith would survive when absolutely nothing was left, when even the voice of love urged him to despair. And Kaelen did not fall. He stood firm, a quiet triumph amidst the relentless pain. Soon others would arrive, bringing with them a new kind of challenge. The tale of Kaelen's tragedy spread like wildfire across the region. His 3 longtime friends, Silas, Brennus, and Theron, heard the news and were horrified. They dropped everything and set out together to see their friend Kaelen. They wanted to comfort him, to cry with him, to understand what had happened. But nothing could prepare them for what they were about to see. From a distance they spotted a figure among the ashes. A man seated on the ground, his body covered in sores, his skin torn, his eyes lost in emptiness. They stared at him, trying to recognize him, but they couldn't. That couldn't be Kaelen. This wasn't the most respected man in the East, the wise, the prosperous, the one blessed by the divine. This man was merely a shadow of who he once was. And then their hearts broke. Unable to hold back, they raised their voices and wept loudly. The lament was so heart-wrenching that even servants and travelers stopped to listen. Grief consumed them. The lament of Silas, Brennus, and Theron was so heart-wrenching that travelers and the few remaining inhabitants of the desolate region paused, their own sorrows momentarily eclipsed. Grief consumed them. With trembling hands they tore their garments, the sound a ragged echo in the desolate air, a traditional sign of profound mourning. Then, unable to simply remain with their tears, they bent low, scooped dust from the ground, and cast it over their heads. It was an act of shared burden, a desperate, silent plea to share in Kaelen's overwhelming affliction, as if by covering themselves with the very earth, they could somehow bear a fraction of his unbearable weight. There were no words. What could be said to a man whose world had crumbled into ash, whose very existence was now a landscape of pain? What words could comfort a soul so deeply wounded? For 7 days and 7 nights they sat together in complete, suffocating silence. Kaelen said nothing, his gaze distant, lost in an abyss of suffering. Neither did his friends speak. They understood in that moment that the deepest sorrow cannot be comforted with mere words. Sometimes, all one can do is be present, a silent witness to unendurable agony, and in that shared silence, they offered a fragile, fleeting solace. Yet that silence, though profound, was not meant to last. Soon, words would inevitably come, and with them, an even greater challenge to Kaelen's unyielding heart. Then, the profound silence of 7 days and 7 nights was shattered, not by a cry of faith, but by a lament that tore through the desolate air. Kaelen, who had borne his losses with such stoicism, opened his mouth, and with a broken voice and a distant gaze he breathed forth a curse, not upon the divine, nor upon his friends, but upon the very day he was born. May the day of my birth perish, he rasped, his words raw with an existential agony that chilled his friends to the bone. Let the moment I was conceived vanish from history. Silas, Brennus, and Theron stared, their eyes wide with horror. They had never heard such words from him. The Kaelen they knew was gone, replaced by a man with no reason left to go on, a soul who saw no purpose in his existence. He didn't ask for answers. He didn't demand justice. He simply wished he had never existed, that his pain might find pause, his suffering respite. Why didn't I perish in the womb? Why didn't my first breaths become my last? If I had died before being born, I would be at peace now. His chest heaved with each ragged sob, a body trapped in a life that no longer held meaning. Why is light given to those in misery? Why allow life to those who no longer wish to exist? Kaelen's words were the voice of a soul crushed by suffering, yet death did not come. The divine did not grant him release. He no longer ate, he no longer slept, he no longer hoped for anything. His friends looked at him in stunned silence, the heavy, oppressive air thick with unspoken fear and dawning judgment. Then the silence of 7 days and 7 nights was shattered. The quiet after Kaelen's lament was thick, yet it didn't last long. Silas, the Tonite, the eldest of the 3 friends, couldn't hold back any longer. He had listened to his friend's suffering, but couldn't comprehend it. He gazed at Kaelen, the man who had once been his advisor, his mentor, his inspiration. He couldn't remain silent. Taking a deep breath, he spoke, his firm gaze fixed on Kaelen, who looked down, weary beyond measure. You taught many, Kaelen. You strengthened the weak. Those who stumbled you lifted with your words. Those who fell you supported with encouragement. And now that calamity has struck you, you crumble? Isn't your fear of the divine your confidence? Wasn't the integrity of your life your hope? His tone was probing, as if Kaelen himself had forgotten what he once preached. The other 2 friends watched, nodding silently, their agreement a heavy weight in the desolate air. Reflect, Kaelen, Silas continued, gesturing emphatically. Has an innocent ever perished? Silas's logic was clear. The divine is just. The divine punishes the wicked. If Kaelen was suffering, then he must have done something. The words were like a poisoned dart. He wasn't directly accusing Kaelen, but the doubt hung in the air. If Kaelen was suffering, he must have sown something wrong. They perish at the breath of the divine, consumed by the blast of his anger. The lion's roars fade. The growls of the beast grow weak. Its teeth are broken, and the old lion dies for lack of prey. There was a moment of silence. Kaelen's pained expression showed the impact of this subtle condemnation. Then his tone shifted. His eyes seemed to cloud over as he recalled something he believed was revealed to him in a vision. Can a mortal be more righteous than the divine? Can a human be purer than their creator? If the divine does not place full trust in his servants, if he finds flaws even among his celestial beings, what must he think of us, mere humans? Silas hadn't directly insulted his friend, but he had ensnared him in a web of harsh and unforgiving logic. His words hinted that Kaelen must have done something to deserve his suffering, that perhaps his own pride had blinded him to his faults. Kaelen, the just man, now sat in ashes, and to Silas, that could only mean one thing. No one is blameless before the divine. Kaelen looked away, distress etching deeper lines into his already tormented face. Kaelen lifted his gaze, his face covered in dust and his eyes sunken from suffering. His pain couldn't be explained by human arguments, nor justified by his friends' logic. With a deep sigh and a voice laden with anguish, he replied, If my complaint and torment could be weighed with justice, if they were placed on a scale, you would see they are heavier than the sand of the sea. That is why my words are hasty, for the burden I carry is unbearable. He paused, struggling to hold back the pain that seeped into his voice. Oh, if only the divine would grant what I long for, if he would allow me to die and be done with all this. If the divine crushed me, it would be my only solace. How much more can I endure? Do I have the strength of rocks? Is my flesh made of bronze? I have no strength left, not even to care for myself. Kaelen looked up and met the gaze of his friends. Anger flared in his eyes. "Those who suffer hope for comfort from a companion," he said bitterly. "But you have betrayed me. You have seen my torment, and instead of supporting me, you have stepped back in fear. Have I asked for help, requested your wealth, pleaded for deliverance from any oppressor?" Silence settled over the group. Kaelen didn't need anything but understanding. He raised his voice, a vacant look in his eyes. "I prefer death over continuing to breathe." Then, suddenly, Brennus the Showhite decided to speak. His situation was straightforward. The divine is just, and if Kaelen's children died, it must have been because they sinned. With a stern look, he said to him, "How long will you speak empty words like a fierce wind? If you sought the divine with humility, if you pleaded with him sincerely, if you were pure and upright, the divine would rise on your behalf and restore your home." Kaelen lifted his weary eyes, the weight of this new accusation settling upon him. Brennus's words were a ruthless blow, cutting through the silence with an unforgiving certainty. Brennus continued, his voice resolute. "Your beginning may have been small, but your end will be great if you return to the divine. Inquire of the past generations. The ancient wise knew the truth. The divine does not forsake the righteous, nor support the wicked. Never has an innocent perished. Those who sow evil will reap it by the breath of the divine." For him, the solution was simple. If Kaelen were upright, the divine would restore him. But if his suffering continued, wasn't it a sign that he needed to acknowledge his fault? He gestured towards the heavens, convinced of his unwavering logic, adding immense pressure to Kaelen's already broken spirit. Kaelen lifted his eyes, wearied beyond measure, the dust and grime clinging to his ravaged face. His friends kept insisting that his suffering must be the result of his own sins, but he knew that no man could truly justify himself before the divine. "What you say is true," he responded, his voice raspy. "But how can anyone argue with the divine? He is not like me, that we might debate face to face. The divine is wise, powerful, unyielding. He stretched out the heavens with his hands, and his wonders are beyond counting. Yet, even if he passes by me, I do not see him. Even if he acts, I cannot comprehend him. Even if I were righteous, I could not defend myself. All I can do is plead with him." Kaelen looked up at the vast, indifferent sky, a sense of immense distance emphasizing his profound isolation. The world lay in the grasp of the wicked, and its judges were blind. If it wasn't the divine allowing this, then who? He felt utterly condemned. Finally his voice broke, a raw, desperate sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of his being. "My divine, why do you treat me this way? What have I done to deserve this punishment? I don't want to go on living. My soul is weary of this life. Why did you create me only to make me suffer?" He reached his hands toward the vast, empty sky, searching for an answer, for any sign. But there was no voice, no indication, just the heavy, oppressive weight of divine silence pressing down upon him. It was a silence that spoke volumes, amplifying his existential pain and the profound despair in his heart. His friends, momentarily stunned and silenced by his raw anguish, could only watch, their own convictions shaken by the sheer depth of his abandonment. He had screamed into the void, and the void had screamed back nothing. If Elvis's words had been a wound and Brennus's a ruthless blow, then Theron's were a dagger thrust deep into Kaelen's heart. Theron, the Nithite, looked at Kaelen with a stern, impatient gaze. To him, everything was straightforward. Kaelen had sinned, and was now facing his rightful punishment. There was no mystery, no room for debate. "Will all this talk go unanswered?" he sneered, his eyes flashing with anger. "Will you still insist on your innocence, on these empty words?" To Theron, Kaelen wasn't a victim, but a fool refusing to admit his wrongdoing, and his stubbornness was an affront. "If only the divine would speak to you and reveal the truth," Theron leaned in, offering a bitter smile as he delivered the cruelest cut. "He would show you the secrets of wisdom, for true wisdom is double-edged, and you would know that the divine is treating you less than your iniquity deserves." Theron's message was brutally clear. Kaelen needed to humble himself, acknowledge the divine's justice, and accept his punishment. Only then, through confession, could he hope for restoration. The combined pressure from his friends, each one convinced of Kaelen's hidden sin, was immense, pushing Kaelen to his absolute breaking point. Job had been broken, insulted, and accused. His patience, a reservoir once thought bottomless, had finally run dry. He stood tall from the dust, his body still a landscape of open sores, but his face hardened by an unyielding spirit. His gaze swept over Silas, Brennus, and Theron, a fire of righteous indignation burning in his sunken eyes. "You all think you possess the wisdom of the divine," he demanded, his voice trembling not with weakness, but with suppressed fury. "Have you become the spokesman for the Almighty? Do you truly believe that only you understand the truth?" His suffering made no sense to them, and their relentless judgment had pushed him beyond the brink of human endurance. He knew his life had been upright, his faithfulness to the divine genuine. If he couldn't find justice or understanding among men, then he would turn to a higher court. Kaelen lifted his face to the heavens, his tear-filled eyes fixed on the vast, indifferent sky. With a voice that was broken yet firm, a testament to an unyielding spirit, he cried out to the Almighty, "My divine, why do you treat me as if I am your enemy? If there is anything in me that condemns me, tell me. If I have sinned, show me. If I am guilty, why don't you forgive me and put an end to this?" The words left his lips, a desperate plea for explanation, for justice, for an end to the torment. He did not understand his suffering, he saw no justice in his ruin, but even in his defiance, his faith remained unshaken. With an iconic conviction that echoed through the desolate land, Kaelen declared, "Even if he slays me, I will trust in him." As his final defiant declaration hung in the air, the wind began to rise, a gentle breeze quickly turning into a whirlwind, stirring the dust around them. It was as if Kaelen's raw, unwavering cry had finally pierced the silence of the heavens. Even as Kaelen's desperate declaration, "Even if he slays me, I will trust in him," hung heavy in the air, the world around them began to stir. A gentle breeze, barely a whisper, rose from the desolate plains where Kaelen and his friends sat. Silas, Brennus, and Theron, still stunned by Kaelen's defiant faith, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the fading sun. The breeze quickly intensified, whipping dust and ashes into swirling patterns, growing in strength and fury until it became a towering whirlwind, dark and formidable, stretching from the parched earth to the darkening sky. The air crackled with an indescribable power. And then, from the heart of that terrifying tempest, a voice thundered, a voice that shook the very foundations of the earth and silenced the howling wind itself. It was the voice of the divine, the powerful voice, resonant with untold authority, cut through the storm's roar, directed not at the trembling friends, but piercing directly into Kaelen's very soul. "Who is this that darkens my counsel with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me." Kaelen, who had so ardently pleaded for an audience, who had cried out for justice and explanation, now found himself face to face with the Almighty. The sheer, overwhelming presence of the divine, manifest within that luminous, terrifying whirlwind, made his heart pound with a force that threatened to shatter his ribs. His desperate pleas for answers now felt insignificant, his understanding profoundly limited. The weight of the divine's presence was too immense, too absolute, for any mortal to bear. The divine's voice, a force that shaped galaxies, thundered from the heart of the whirlwind, not with explanation, but with an overwhelming question. "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me, if you possess understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know who stretched the measuring line across it?" Kaelen could barely breathe, the sheer magnitude of the divine's presence crushing his former demands for answers. He had sought justice, but the divine was revealing not the reasons for his suffering, but Kaelen's own profound insignificance. His intellectual challenge was replaced by profound humility, shrinking under the cosmic weight of creation itself. The voice continued, its power weaving images of creation directly into Kaelen's mind. Who shut up the sea behind doors when it burst forth from the womb? Have you ever commanded the morning in your days? Have you shown the dawn its place? Kaelen's heart, already heavy with loss, now shrank further within him. He understood, with a dawning, terrifying clarity, that the divine owed him no explanations. He was the creator, the entire universe subject to his will, infinitely greater than man could comprehend. His earlier pleas, his desperate questions, now seemed like the naive cries of a child. All that remained was profound awe and an intellectual, spiritual surrender. The divine's voice boomed, cutting through the swirling storm. Will you still contend with the Almighty? Let him who accuses the divine answer. Kaelen, who had so desperately pleaded for an audience, now found himself face to face with an overwhelming glory. His earlier demands, his cries for explanation, shattered within him like brittle glass. He had nothing left to say, nothing to argue, nothing to demand. He bowed his head, utterly speechless, diminished to a speck before the boundless power that surrounded him. Then the divine continued, his voice piercing Kaelen's very soul. Will you discredit my justice to vindicate yourself? Will you nullify my judgment? A chill ran through Kaelen's body. That was precisely what he had done. He had wanted the divine to explain his suffering, to prove that he, Kaelen, was innocent. But now, in the face of such majesty, he understood. The divine's justice required no explanation from man. It simply was. His expression shifted, a dawning clarity replacing confusion. The divine began to describe his creation in even greater detail, his voice resonating through the whirlwind, painting images in Kaelen's mind. He spoke of the behemoth, a majestic beast he had made with bones like iron bars and a strength no one could tame. Then he spoke of Leviathan, an unbeatable sea monster with fire erupting from its mouth and eyes that shone like the dawn. No one could challenge it. No one could subdue it. If no one can face these creatures I have created, who then can challenge me? Kaelen could no longer hold back. Bowing deeply, he fell in the dust and confessed, his voice trembling, I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes see you. His heart was surrendered. Before, he had spoken without understanding. He had questioned without seeing the divine's vastness. The divine didn't provide answers. He gave his presence, and that was enough. Kaelen found sufficiency not in explanations for his suffering, but in the overwhelming glory of the divine. The whirlwind, still churning with divine power, shifted its focus. The divine, whose voice had just brought Kaelen to profound repentance, now turned his gaze to Silas, Brennus, and Theron. Their faces, pale with fear, reflected the sudden crushing weight of his presence. His voice, though no longer questioning Kaelen, thundered with an undeniable authority, heavy with displeasure. My anger burns against you, he declared, for you have not spoken the truth about me as my servant Kaelen has. The words struck them like a hammer blow. Kaelen, the man they had scorned, accused, and judged, the man who had suffered beyond all comprehension, was now justified by the Almighty himself. A chilling realization dawned upon the three friends. Their rigid logic, their confident accusations, had been nothing but empty words in the face of true, unyielding faith. The divine was not yet finished. He instructed them, Now bring for yourselves 7 bulls and 7 rams, and go to my servant Kaelen, and offer a burnt offering for yourselves. My servant Kaelen will pray for you, and I will accept him. The command hung in the air, a final, humbling directive. The men who had wounded Kaelen with their bitter words now had to seek his intercession for their very souls. Kaelen, his heart transformed, harbored no resentment. With a profound compassion that transcended his own suffering, he looked at his friends, humbled and trembling, and prayed for them. And, as Kaelen interceded, something miraculous happened. The divine heard his prayer. The Lord restored Kaelen's life, and at that very moment, the tide of blessing began to turn, signaling the imminent return of all he had lost and more. The divine, in his infinite wisdom and boundless mercy, did not merely restore Kaelen. He poured out a blessing so vast, so encompassing, that the very land of Uz seemed to breathe anew. The friends and family who had once abandoned Kaelen, shrinking from his diseased form in the shadow of his misfortune, now returned, not out of obligation, but drawn by a profound sense of awe and a renewed understanding of the divine's hand. They brought with them not just comfort, but riches, gifts that symbolized their repentance and their renewed respect for the man who had endured the unthinkable. But this was only the beginning. Where once the fields lay barren and scorched, now lush, vibrant pastures stretched to the horizon, teeming with life. The few animals that had survived the initial onslaught, or perhaps were miraculously spared, began to multiply beyond measure. Herds of cattle, once counted in the hundreds, now numbered in the thousands, their lowing a symphony across the plains. Flocks of sheep, gleaming white under the sun, dotted the hillsides like scattered clouds, doubling and tripling with astonishing speed. His camels, once stolen by marauders, were replaced by countless others, laden with precious goods, a testament to a prosperity that surpassed even his former glory. Kaelen, no longer scraping sores in the dust, now walked his vast, thriving estate, a figure of serene strength. Beside him, Lyra, her eyes no longer filled with despair, but with a quiet, profound joy, shared in the wonder of their renewed abundance. Busy servants, more numerous and diligent than before, moved through the bustling courtyards and flourishing fields, their cheerful industry echoing the divine's abundant grace. Kaelen witnessed with his own eyes what he had never thought he would see again. A world overflowing with blessings, a testament to a faith that had not faltered. His greatest treasure was not just his wealth, but the profound peace that settled upon his unyielding heart, a peace born of knowing the divine's ultimate sovereignty.